the first look. Right, I wanted to do this first look. I've held off watching this because I wanted to watch it with you guys. So I'm excited. I really like Troy, and I feel like from what I've heard everything, this is very Troy-esque. So I am excited for it. But let's just go ahead and jump in.
Hello, and welcome to your first look at Total War PHARAOH. My name is Evan Teixeira, Lead Community Manager at Creative Assembly on Total War.
And my name is Yusuf Ali, Community Manager on Total War. We're excited to sit down with the developers here at CA Sofia.
We'll be joined by Maya Georgieva, Todor Nikolov, and Alexander Georgiev.
We'll also be joined by Emmanuel Tomov, Milcho Vasilev, and Hristo Enev.
And we're very excited to talk about the campaign, the battles.
We'll also explore the rich history and beauty behind ancient Egypt and the brutality of the Bronze Age.
But first, let's take another look at that awesome announced trailer for Total War PHARAOH.
I'm gonna skip this because it's just dung beetles fighting. Ramesses fights a dung beetle. Feels very lucky from it, and then they fight.
Welcome to your first look at Total War PHARAOH. I am happy to be joined by Maya and Todor, who have come over from the dev team to come say hello. And we're going to get right into it by asking, what is Total War PHARAOH?
Total War PHARAOH, simply put, is the next big historical Total War. It's focused on Egypt, and it aims to encompass all of the Bronze Age collapse era, bringing everything relevant to this, exciting time to the, Total War player.
So basically, this is a Creative Assembly Sophia, which makes the Saga games, most, as far as I understand. So this is basically a Saga game, but without the Saga, probably because it was not very good for marketing. Saga is a little bit more limited in scope. Like Troy was like basically just focused on Troy. There was the Viking one that was literally just the British Isles with the Viking invasion. So it's definitely not a full, apparently it's not a full Total War experience in terms of like worldwide or continent wide. It's just a limited zone.
And to the series.
What can players expect from this new historical title?
Well, the players can expect to be immersed into the Bronze Age collapse, the very last portion of the Bronze Age. And this means that they will have to go through a struggle to gain power in order to survive the apocalypse that descends upon the world. They will also be able to play as an Egyptian faction or...
Real quick, this sounds like it's going to be kind of like in Total War Warhammer, the Chaos Invasions. So it's probably a very similar mechanic to that. Hopefully it's a little bit more dynamic, because for Total War Warhammer 2, it was just basically a bunch of Chaos armies spawning, and I think Total War Warhammer 1 did that as well. And then Total War Warhammer 3, you just have a bunch of different like factions spawning massive armies, and then just basically declaring war on everyone. Hopefully it's a little bit more different, like more complex, but at the same time, just sea peoples essentially coming from the Mediterranean would be a little silly. We'll see.
Or a faction belonging to one of the other Bronze Age cultures from that time period.
And who are these different cultures? Can you name them all?
I imagine that at least the playable ones, along with the Egyptians, we are portraying the city-states of Canaan and the Hittite Empire that is about to collapse and will likely collapse before the Egyptians.
We've had 23 years of historical titles. What's different about PHARAOH from all the ones we've seen in the past?
We really have had, a long series, but we haven't had a series.
I want one of these shirts, honestly. This is like a legit shirt.
is focused on Egypt up until now. So this is the first time Total War is exploring Bronze Age Egypt, one of the greatest civilizations ever. And also we're bringing, of course, through a Egypt-centric, point of view, the rest of the Bronze Age collapse as well. What puts, Pharaoh apart is that it kind of reveals this new age and also puts, the player freedom at the center. So we get to have like a very the freest form of expression in your campaign as much as you can.
And actually, the very time period that we have chosen, like the end of the 13th century BC, actually helped us.
All right, real quick, let me change the background to it's gonna work. Sand, desert, the right color. I think this is the best color we're gonna. Button's not working. Yeah, we're gonna stick with this because that looks as sandy as I can get it. Yep. Anyways, continue.
Because there is relatively little information about some of our characters, so we had to extrapolate a lot to really flesh them out. But at the same time, we had to, because we're aiming to have these strong characters with recognizable presence in the game.
You touched on it, but why does this era make for an interesting Total War setting?
Well, the New Kingdom period, which is what we're covering in the game, and so a portion of the New Kingdom period, it's when Egypt grew to be an empire and they projected their influence far from the banks of the Nile. And it's perfect for a Total War setting, and actually the military technology also fits the purpose of Total War because they had chariots in the older kingdoms that they did not have them. In this particular portion, we're showing a very peculiar kind of Egypt, an Egypt that gets gradually torn by civil wars and internal strife. And this is an era ripe for a total war. Apart from that, the entire world slowly sinks into a crisis, which then turns into the collapse of the Bronze Age, because all of the civilizations are gradually falling apart in the region. There are a lot of disasters happening, and there are also a sort of external danger.
I'm really curious how they're going to
above the region.
represent
It's
that,
really dramatic time.
like rebel armies or something,
you have
maybe.
Invasions, you have internal turmoil and strife, and that's what make a good setting for Total War.
So
This is bugging me
after
down
the
here.
pyramids, it's obviously after the Valley of the Kings. Are these the final days of Egypt?
Kind of, they could be. Historically, they were almost saved by the bell, just by a little bit. Egypt is, ancient. Egypt
It's down here, bugging me.
Our protagonists, let's say, in the game,
They've just gotten a red carpet or
from
something.
The builders of the pyramids by millennia. The saying goes, everything fears time, time fears the pyramids, right? So we kind of imagine Egypt as something monolithic, something super stable, but it did have crises in its history, and this is one of the biggest ones, because at the time of the Bronze Age collapse, almost all of the known world was swept away and displaced, basically destroyed. Only Egypt survived.
Yeah, I think the Bronze Age collapse that included like the Greeks at the time and all of the civilizations on the east end of Mediterranean. I don't think it affected anywhere on the west per se. My understanding is, yeah, basically a bunch of migrants basically came in. We're still not sure where. Historians are not sure where, and invaded essentially all over. So I think most historians think it's like agricultural decline or something happened, like maybe a warming or a cooling of regions, and there was massive famine or something like that, and forced these sort of sea people, as they're called, to basically invade and migrate into already inhabited lands, seeking sort of shelter and new homes. But it obviously like disrupted all the civilizations that were already there. But it'll be interesting to see, again, like I'm saying, how they actually do that.
Survived. And this is what our players need to do, to save Egypt the way Ramses did.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating is that we're talking about Egypt right now, like something that lasted millennia and then ceased to be. But in fact, Egyptian culture still lives on. I mean, the fact that we're right now here and we're working on a game that's, you know, like glorifying this particular episode. This, as I said, a tiny fracture of their entire history, is amazing. And I often wonder, what would Egyptians, the ancient Egyptians, think if they realize that in the future there are these people that have this very particular kind of entertainment that is difficult for us to grasp, but they're doing is to honor us.
We should be worship cats more.
Definitely.
I think they'd be proud of what the internet has done.
Yes.
Here's a question. Who are the big people bringing about this downfall? You talk about this evolution into collapse and the end of the Bronze Age. What's causing that?
The whole collapse was a very complex process, and of course, shrouded in the mist of history, we can only theorize about what exactly happened. But it was a combination of a lot of factors, like collapse of trading networks, disasters, and these external threats, the so-called sea peoples. In the game, they're very much prominent because they serve as a challenge for you to overcome, especially towards the end of the game. Who are the sea peoples? We can only imagine. Like, some of them are coming from the Aegean, some are coming from further west, some of them are raiders and marauders that just arrive here to plunder and destroy.
You better not just like
Others
spawn
actually are
like
displaced
armies.
and they're looking for a new place to
I
settle.
hope it's a little bit more complicated.
But whether their intentions are actually just to find a new home or not, it matters very little, because they turn out to be a threat to every civilization in the area. And it is believed that they brought destruction to the city-states in Greece, to the Hittite Empire in Anatolia, to the many kingdoms in the Levant, and they threatened Egypt itself at the end. But as we mentioned, Ramesses managed to push them back.
So we're not talking about mythical Atlanteans coming up. We're talking about a group of people who are coming in and threatening the whole region.
Yeah, exactly. Nothing mythical about them. They're just coming here to take.
It's really disappointing this wasn't like mythical based, but I mean,
shiny stuff.
So
I'm down
in
for
Total War
historical
Pharaoh,
as well.
They're the big
but
baddies who are really pushing
so many
things along in the game.
options
Yeah,
for
you could say
mythical.
that. Pharaoh is interesting because it's both centered on this, you know, moment in time when civilizations were threatened and were not actually ready to withstand the threat. It came by surprise. And Egypt managed, but at the same time, it wasn't easy, right? And you get to think about what you would do in that situation where you need to probably seize power and also repel an external invasion. So that is not only, you know, the usual Total War vying for power, but also thinking about how to also, you know, protect the kingdom that you have afterwards.
The experience that we're trying to give to the player in the game is one about gaining power and using that power to survive and overcome the challenges. Like,
Conquer cities,
getting
right?
that power is not the ultimate
More
goal.
armies, more cities.
Using that power to protect what is yours is actually, which is a part of the survival thing.
Awesome. So it's really about building a kingdom in Egypt, and one that would last.
More armies,
like
more
we
cities.
know the Egyptian kingdoms really did.
Yeah, of course. And the sandbox aspect of the game also kicks in here, because you're in no way obliged to, say, become the pharaoh in order to survive. You can try to do it without becoming the pharaoh. Of course, it would be a bit harder for you.
It's kind of like Shogun,
but it's still
Three
something that is
Kingdoms
up to
kind of
the player to decide.
mechanics.
Thank you, Todor. Thank you, Maya, for joining
there's
us. to give
the
this
Pharaoh, the
awesome
Emperor,
overview
and
of Total
then
War Pharaoh.
kind
We
of
absolutely
vying
can't
for that
wait to dive into
seat.
more of this game.
We are back with Todor, and welcome, Alex. So we are going to be discussing the campaign here for Total War Pharaoh. So let's get into it. Tell me about it.
The campaign is going to be easily recognized by anyone who has played a Total War game. You send out your armies, you conquer settlements, you develop your settlements, you send even more armies, and further on until you paint
nice.
the map as much as you want to.
Definitely reminds me of Total War Rome too. I think, well, I guess Troy had that as well. So cool to see that coming back, because I feel like there's a lot less of that for the Warhammer series, which is the newest series.
What we have introduced in the campaign is the
It's just
addition
historical
of
series
very
have
significant
that.
choices that you need to make through your playthrough, and these make up the faction that you are playing.
Amazing. So you've mentioned developing your own playstyle. So what does this mean for a player to becoming Pharaoh?
Well, for example, some of those significant choices that you need to make are, for example, which of the Bronze Age gods.
These are so. This is very much like Troy. Troy, you would dedicate stuff to different gods for benefits.
Worship, like you can't worship every god, but just a limited amount of those. You can also join the court of the Egyptian pharaoh or the Hittite great king. Which position exactly do you want to take?
Very much like Three Kingdoms and like the other historical titles have kind of things. This sort of mechanic, but this reminds me a lot of Three Kingdoms.
You want to be a high commander and gain access to more units, or perhaps the vizier who has more access to some internal court intrigue and stuff like that. But perhaps the most significant choice would be whether you want to become the pharaoh or the Hittite great king.
Interesting. So you can either choose one or the other. The whole point of the game is not just to become Pharaoh?
Well, not really. You get to choose either of those because this will help you also survive the collapse of the Bronze Age. Are there any other choices, Alex, that you can make?
There is one more choice you can make. You can choose not to become any of those. You can choose to be a brave person and do it by yourself, not regarding yourself with courting tricks, etc. All this noise, if you will.
Yeah.
It's going to be hard at all. It's going to be much tougher to do that.
But again, do you want to spend your gold in the court or do you want to spend it on troops?
Let's see. Something interesting here, like all of our systems that we're trying we're creating them with the idea of the sandbox element of the game. So when we're talking about many choices, the player will have the choice to combine all of those systems in a particular way that they would like to do.
So obviously the evolution of your kingdom is a big deal, whether you choose to be a pharaoh or whether you choose to be a Hittite king or choose to go the bold path of nothing. But all of this sort of revolves around this idea of your kingdom evolving from prosperity to crisis to collapse. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it's more than your kingdom. It's actually the entire world. This is how we portray the collapse of the Bronze Age. The world
Sounds like it's going to be like some sort of threat meter or Civilization 6, like global warming scale. You do X or don't do X, and the meter increases, and at some point it's going to hit milestones or endpoint where you'll hit barbarians.
Goes through several distinct states of collapse, and it all depends
Sounds
on
like milestones.
the pillars of civilization. These are special settlements on the campaign map that we consider core for the Bronze Age civilized world. And as these settlements get damaged or even destroyed, the overall level of civilization goes down. And there are, as I said, several different levels.
Milestones.
Prosperity, where the world is bright and sunny, and you can see it in the game. But as these pillars of civilization get destroyed or damaged,
that's cool.
The world will grow foggier, as if though there is an impending sandstorm on the horizon, and this is the level of
chaos,
crisis.
corruption.
As you enter the level of crisis, not only the visuals will change, both in campaign and in battle. Roving barbarian factions, for example, the sea peoples and those tribes that live in the deserts will also get buffs, which will empower them. And there is a further level of collapse where the world gets darker.
So it sounds like they won't just spawn.
Clearer, but darker at the
be
same
around
time,
and
it really
actually attack you.
conveys the sense of despair. You are not at the brink of apocalypse at this point. You are within the apocalypse, and you need to survive. It takes everything for you to push through this.
You might not.
You might not. You might not survive. Most of the civilizations back then did not survive.
They didn't. Yeah.
Egypt did, but
historically, we know what happened during the collapse of the Bronze Age. We have the sea peoples washing over the shores of the Mediterranean Sea. There was probably some apocalyptic event in the realm. So we represent this in the game by disasters of different sorts. They're not visible on the campaign map, but they can affect huge parts of the map.
I guess it's like it's going to be like penalties or well, not buffs, right? Since they're talking about collapsing and crises that you have to deal with. So it's probably going to be like debuffs to your either cities or your faction as a whole, or I assume it's going to be like buildings damaged. That was a big thing they had in Warhammer, was Total War Warhammer, was buildings getting damaged from an event, population loss, stuff like that. I could see where those same sort of mechanics would play in here. And like I said, it sounds like, at least so far, the sea peoples or barbarians won't just be spawning. They'll like be around. Maybe they'll spawn off screen and then come in, but at least they're not like on top of you, or just like spawn on a settlement. Who knows?
So
They know.
when you go into
I don't know,
collapse,
but we'll see.
earthquakes, plagues, droughts, they will start.
Yeah, see, okay. Damage settlement structures, like I said. All settlements in Lower Egypt, so it sounds like a region debuff. Scorching heat, low watermark season. So food production decreased. So they'll probably have food resource. That'll be interesting. I could see attrition also, maybe some attrition in Lower Egypt. So if you're moving your army out of a city, they'll suffer damage until they go back into a city or something like that.
Appear much frequently. The player would like not to be in this place. Yeah.
I don't think anyone would at this point.
So basically, as the world, as your civilization goes and collapses sort of through war or turmoil, the whole world is representing that by collapsing as well.
And the thing is, we have pures of civilization, those settlements, we have them across the map. So the player might start in Egypt, but all of a sudden in Canaan, for example, some of those pures of civilization there are destroyed. What can the player do just to amend the situation? They need to go there and conquer these lands and just raise up these settlements back.
So if other pillars of civilization are struggling, it will have an impact on the whole world,
On the entire map, yeah. Yes, that's why there are pillars of civilization. They are across the world. So during your early stage of the game, the player will see how things probably go south. Things are going bad, and they won't have the tools in their hands to fix that. But once they become pharaoh, probably, and you saw those awesome power there, they'll be much more capable of bringing this back. And once again, depending on the level of difficulty, we are not aiming to provide an easy way out for the players. Only the most dedicated would probably be able to achieve prosperity back.
Yeah. So basically swing the whole world back into the happy times.
You need to conquer it, you need to raise it back to health. It's going to take
Nice. So you touched base parts of being pharaoh. So what is the implementation of the crown? How do you become pharaoh?
Well, each faction in the game can gain statistical legitimacy. And the more legitimacy you have, the stronger your claim. And
so, just want to see this real quick. You get to choose which one you want to do. So if you're like Ramses in Egypt, you can choose the Hittite legitimacy path. Interesting. That'd be very interesting.
The more legitimacy you have, the stronger your claim to the crown of the pharaoh or the throne of the Hittite great king is. Sure. And in order to increase your legitimacy, you need to own territory that is part of the Egyptian or the Hittite Empire. And there are additional ways that you can increase your legitimacy. For example, you can build monuments to your name. You can also conquer the land of your neighbors, and if they contain monuments, you will just usurp them so that you can use them yourself, which is something that historically happened in ancient Egypt and not only. So
it's like minor
legitimacy,
settlements
and at some
almost.
point, when you have reached a sufficiently high level, you can proclaim yourself to be the actual pharaoh. Now, it really much depends if there is a single pharaoh at the moment, in which case it is harder to do so.
Yep.
But in case there is no single pharaoh, which is going to be at some point the state of the game for the Egyptians, because all Pharaoh Merneptah will die at some point. These are spoilers. Sorry. I should have given a sign before that. Yeah.
So your rulers can die from old age. Sounds like.
It will be much easier for you to proclaim yourself a pharaoh if there is no single sitting pharaoh. And then you enter a period of civil war that you will have to push through, and you will have to be the faction with the most legitimacy at the end, in which case you become the single ruling pharaoh, and you enjoy the full privileges of being a pharaoh.
And before talking about the privileges, there is something I think interesting. We have this David to Goliath type of story, because we start with limited resources and limited lands. To become eligible for the crown, you need to have at least one sacred land. So this is like a fairy tale. Like, you have this sacred land, now you can strive to become a pharaoh. There are like many other things that you need to do, many more lands to conquer, many more monuments to construct. But this is the path. You start from one single land. So anybody, a Canaan faction, can go in Egypt, conquer one land, and all of a sudden become eligible to become the pharaoh.
Yeah, it's actually the choice that we mentioned earlier, that you get to choose whether you want to become the pharaoh or the Hittite great king. And it is possible for an Egyptian faction, for example, it will be more straightforward if they go for being a pharaoh, but they can also head north to Anatolia, conquer a bit of Hittite land, and proclaim themselves a pretender for the throne of the Hittite great king.
It's interesting.
Which did not actually happen in history, although at some point there was a Hittite prince who was invited actually to go to Egypt and become the pharaoh, but he was ambushed and killed en route.
So close. But in terms of legitimacy, generally, we can see it in history. If you have enough lands and enough other claims to legitimacy, you can go and try to claim the crown.
Yeah, I remember that in the very beginning we were wondering, is this actually a plausible scenario? But yeah, enough research and confirmed with some experts, it turned out that almost everything that would work in any state in history is also applicable for ancient Egypt.
We're humans, and that's why we like history games so much. Like the stories there are just as fascinating as any fantasy that you can imagine, like real life.
Incredible.
That makes sense.
So thank
That
you,
makes
Todor.
sense.
Thank you, Alex. It's been an absolute pleasure having you here. We cannot wait to dive into the
All
campaign
right, battle and
mechanics on
gameplay. This is what I want to see.
But first, here's a quick sneak peek at the campaign map. Enjoy.
The thing I loved about Troy was just like how gorgeous the campaign map was. It was a work of art, honestly. Like, you look into the sky and you'd see the different gods from the different areas too. Like, you look south and you'd see like the Egyptian gods and stuff like that. It was really cool. I hope they carry that over to this game as well. But this already looks pretty great. It'll be interesting. It looks like
Welcome back, everyone, and welcome, Christo,
the river is
Nacho.
actually like a
Pleasure to have
barrier.
you both to talk battles
cool.
today.
Well, for Total War Pharaoh, we wanted to make sure that battles feel a lot more historical and realistic. Of course, we, being in the Bronze Age, have some limited access to different unit types. So we have tried to focus even more with our features on the infantry versus infantry combat. For example, the unit stances feature.
Yeah, unit stance is a new feature that actually replaces the formations we had in old Total Wars. So they're basically orders that you give to units, but instead of a movement or attack order, they're actually ordered to go forward or an order to go backwards while facing forward.
Yeah, we have also introduced a lot of new animations and the way the animations work for infantry versus infantry combat. You are now going to see a lot of more matched animations between the different units. You will see units actually defending against attacks, then striking back. We have also introduced
I'm not super big on this aspect. It's usually because I'm zoomed out enough to where I usually don't notice those. But if you were ever going to like slow down or watch a replay or you had time where it was just like infantry on, well, I guess it's going to be infantry on infantry, but you're not micromanaging armies. Those are really, really cool, but for me, it's definitely not something I'm super concerned about. I'd rather have the battles be more fun, basically. But it's definitely a nice touch, but I'm usually too much of a micromanager in my battles to really focus on that.
A lot more varied battle maps that have a lot more features built into them that will bring more tactical decisions to the player that is in command of their armies. So now they can find those features like cliffs or forests or different difficult terrains or water that can protect them from the side and try to exploit them in the best way that they can. Thus, for example, try to create their own choke point battle or find a good place on the map where they can ambush the enemy while they're coming at them.
Amazing. So like the dynamic like terrain and stuff has been completely changed for Total War Pharaoh. So you can really take advantage of your battles against your enemies.
Well, we had weather system in previous Total Wars, but now we're introducing a dynamic change to the weather. So, for example, a battle can start in a rain environment, and it can gradually become a storm or even a thunderstorm. And that can change the terrain as well. In rain, there will be patches of mud appearing on the battlefield. And for example, in a sandstorm, there will be patches of sand just gradually building up.
Yeah, and those have
It'll be interesting to see how well they implement that. Like, I mean, if it's raining constantly in Egypt, that wouldn't really make sense from what I understand. But I mean, other areas for sure that makes sense. But it's just like every battle you have in Egypt is just like, oh, it's raining now. It's like, okay, well, it's a little odd. But ideally they would replace it with like sandstorms or something. I think that would be better. Yeah, we'll see.
Effects on the units that are going to be on the battlefield. For an example, heavier units or chariots are going to find it hard to move through mud and that sort of terrain. Sand is going to exhaust units moving through it faster, depending again on how light they are, thus giving the lighter units more advantage when they're fighting on sand. And the weather itself is going to change the way some of the units behave. For example, archers are going to find it much harder to hit their targets when they're trying to shoot in a sandstorm. You can imagine how hard that can
Interesting.
be.
So the dynamic weather has like again completely changed the way you look at battles now. So you've got rain, you've got thunderstorms. Is there anything else we can expect from weather?
Yes, there is also fog, which is from previous Total Wars. There is sandstorm, which I mentioned before. And there is sweltering weather, which is a desert being really hot.
So very warm, very, very hot.
Yeah, this will have a huge impact on the exhaustion levels of your units, and you need to be careful when you're fighting in a sweltering.
I wonder how important exhaustion will be.
The players are not going to be expecting the dynamic weather.
Usually it's like a minor debuff.
That they're fighting.
They will need to adapt to.
Yeah, this is
the new
something that they need
situation.
to adapt to and see how their tactics might change. Because if they have thought that they can take a certain approach towards the enemy, but then a rain comes out and makes it so that this whole terrain becomes all muddy, they might think that this approach might not be as good for their chariots, for example, and need to change their battle plans on the fly when those things happen. Choosing
Wonder if you could
where
dismount
you
your
fight
chariots.
basically will depend on the type of army that you're building.
Or
and
they don't
you
have cavalry.
For example, it's a very natural thing that the Egyptians have much lighter armies that are going to be finding it easier to fight when they're on sand or in sweltering weather because their armor is usually not as heavy and they're kind of used to that type of terrain. Whereas the Hittites, being more heavily armored and not so used to this type of terrain, are going to be finding it much harder when they need to fight in the sand. On the other hand, they are heavier with better armor, so in hand-to-hand engagements, when the Egyptians are not using the advantage of their terrains around them, the Hittites might have an upper hand in that.
Yeah. And there are even units that have even more advantage when fighting in the desert just because they're suited and they've lived their whole lives in the desert.
That's awesome. So it sounds like there are a ton of factors that weigh into any battle, from the unit you're bringing to the field to the weather, What else is in Total War Pharaoh that makes it different from other titles in the historical Total War catalog?
Well, we have improved on the way sieges work and introduced a number of new things there.
I heard about this.
Fire
This is interesting.
being one of the big ones. Now, we've had fire before, and we've seen fire in Total War games from a long time ago, but now it is much more dynamic, and it can spread around.
Okay, cool.
and
That looks
it
good.
can deliberately set certain places of either a settlement or even a forest ablaze, so that they can use this as a tactical advantage if this is the type of tactic that they want to employ.
Okay.
Setting a settlement on fire is going to make it easier for the attacker to try and capture it, but then again, it will also make it so that later, if they want to repair it and keep it after capturing it, it will be much more expensive to repair that city.
Sense. That makes sense.
And the local population is probably not going to be as happy if you set their city ablaze when we were trying to fight
Got to
there.
be smart.
Their favorite papyrus.
But the fire is, as I said, dynamic, so it will spread around. So even if you are trying to employ a tactic in which you're trying to...
So you
avoid
accidentally burn down the whole
you
town,
need to
and
be
they're
careful
mad at you
how
anyway?
you're doing it, because the way the fire spreads, your units might suffer from that as well.
Don't win the
Because
battle really fast.
Better do damage to units. Like if units are caught in fire.
Exactly, because fire doesn't recognize friend from foe.
Okay, good. Sounds like it does. It's not just like
a
debuff or something like that.
Removed pocket ladders, finally, and we've replaced them with siege ladders. So we'll have siege ladders, siege towers, battering rams, and then the new thing that the ancient Egyptians love to do, wall sapping. They
undermined the walls.
the wall, and
walls
that
of
makes-
the
Oh,
settlements
interesting.
so
That's
that
interesting.
It can actually crumble down.
and create an opening for the attacking army.
Now, the wall sapping doesn't happen dynamically on the battlefield, but in the campaign, if the player decides to invest a few turns in undermining the walls of the settlement, they can actually bring some of them down and then start the assault, which will
Okay,
make them fight
interesting.
in a different...
I was thinking you'd have like
which
units
has already
go
some of the
and
walls
do it
broken
real
down,
time.
and the enemy needs to find different ways in which to defend their settlement instead of just placing soldiers over the walls.
It sounds like historical accuracy is really important in Total War Pharaoh.
We have tried to make sure that this game is as historically authentic as we possibly can make it. Of course, there are some gameplay elements that still need to be present for it to work. But all the units...
I mean, there's other games that have
the way the
sapping
settlements
real
have been
time,
done, the way
so
they have been
a little
designed.
disappointing
We
that
have
they
been
can't do
looking
that,
at
but
ancient maps and ancient
is what it is.
representations of certain settlements and armor and equipment and all those things to make sure that they look exactly as they looked back then.
And then we do try to improve on how chariots work, because you can't have a Bronze Age game without chariots. We have a few different types of chariots, but the main thing is that we increase the number of chariots you have, and chariots are really, really powerful for Pharaoh.
We wanted to make sure that armies look large with a lot of chariots in them. So now instead of just having 12 or
That's
18
legit. Like,
chariots
look at all
in the
those.
field,
Wow.
and you have up to 30 chariots in the unit, and
Wow.
they're still going to maneuver around the battlefield well. The way you use chariots, if you decide to try and employ them in your tactics, is going to be very important, because they can be amazingly strong when used in the right way, and be very expensive and not effective at all if used in the wrong way.
You can get this chariots.
In past games, in past Total War games, chariots were always sort of an issue because of how micro-intensive they were. I think Troy improved on that a little bit, and then I think Total War Warhammer 3 improved more, basically just making them heavier so they can just push through enemies a lot easier. But you know, once they get bogged down, then it's kind of like a death sentence. So for that reason, it's like you constantly have to have them move. So it'll be really interesting to see how they depict that in this game. You know, I'm all for the chariot concept and having the chariots be super powerful. But you know, obviously you want to balance it out in the game. But you know, to have it then super micro intensive, I think is a disservice to them. That's why I think a lot of people don't play with chariots in games that have the Total War games that have chariots, because it is just so micro intensive. You're focusing on your front line, your archers, and then your cavalry, maybe, sure, but then you also have like chariots who you need to like make sure they're just constantly like, you know, running people down or firing or something like that. And then they're also slower than cavalry. But this game won't have cavalry, so I guess it'll be a balance, and we'll just have to see how that pans out.
Stuck in mud, for example, or in sand if it's a heavy chariot. That's not a good position to be.
It's absolutely amazing. So just the complexity of it. It's no longer just a power play. It is you got to consider all these factors in your battle.
Yes.
If the player is utilizing the terrain the way they are supposed to, the way they should, and if the player is playing to the strengths of their own army and to the weaknesses of the enemy army, they are going to have a lot more chances to win a battle that actually might look very, very bad for them.
I wonder how
beginning.
big of an impact
Miljo,
this
Christo, thank
terrain's
you for
going to
joining us
have,
to talk
because
about
like if
battle.
it's
Oh my God, that was so
if it's
much
not
fun.
enough of an impact, then
Ladders,
people just will
weather,
ignore it.
fire. Let's take
So,
a quick look at those beautiful
be
battle
interesting to
maps
see.
and a special look at the city of Mennefer.
Looks nice. Can we get hippo riders? That'd be legit. Or wild hippos that you just release, like dogs, like wild dogs. What I want. That's what I want. The thing I always love in Total War games is how big the streets are.
Welcome back to Todor.
You know, you have to have a huge
Pharaoh.
street
So
in
we are
a
gonna
small
be talking
town
about
for
the culture and history of
units to
Total
move
War
through.
Pharaoh. So let's get right into it. Tell me about the new kingdom of Egypt.
Yeah, so the New Kingdom is the period in which Egypt grows to a majestic empire. It takes place between the 16th and the 11th century BC, and we're looking at a period right at the end, after the Egyptian empire has reached its topmost position, and it started to slowly go into decline.
So Egyptian deities were a huge part of Egyptian culture. So what part do they play in Total War Pharaoh?
Different subsets of deities were revered in different parts of the realms, and we are reflecting this in the game by having different subsets of deities being available in each realm, and whereupon you discover this subset and you are able to worship them, sort of like you've encountered them.
That was a lot. Let's see. Let me see.
Whereupon
Go back,
you
let me-
discover
there you go.
this subset, and
That's quite a lot to choose
and
from.
you are able to worship them, sort of like you've encountered this local cult and you've decided that this is a god worth worshiping because it suits you.
Yeah, so it's like Troy. It's like
Usually.
Troy in terms of the
challenge that
bonuses
we
you
have in the game is
get
that
from
we're
worshiping
not
different
only
gods.
showing the Egyptian gods, but we're also showing the gods of the Hittites and the Canaanites.
Sure.
And the main problem is that we can't include absolutely every deity. That's impossible, because the Hittites, for example, they had
They supposedly had 1,000.
yeah.
Oh wow.
So they really
Thousand.
went into details.
It would be a bit mechanics heavy, the game.
Yeah.
And also we
Makes sense.
would need every
Slow
little
bit.
village and group of people to have their own separate god, which would be kind of difficult to implement, honestly.
Of course.
Now, I know you just mentioned that you've got all these different cultures with all of these different deities, and obviously we're representing a territory all the way from up in Turkey, down through Egypt, all the way down to Sudan. So can you tell me a little bit about the cultures in Total War Pharaoh and sort of the role they play in the game?
The playable cultures are three. You have the Egyptians, the Canaanites, and the Hittites. And there are also cultures that are not playable. For example, to the west of the Nile, there are the Libu tribes that are living as desert nomads, occasionally threatening you, but perhaps occasionally you can strike a truce with them and perhaps even hire some of their units. We have tried to express the cultural diversity of the Bronze Age with every tool that we had at our disposal. For example, different cultures have different units. They also inhabit different climates on the campaign map.
It'd be cool if you could
will
recruit
be fighting
those
on desert battle
culturally
maps
different
or,
units if you conquer
battle
that
maps around
area.
the Nile or in Oasis when you're fighting anywhere in Egypt, while the battle maps in Anatolia
Older
are green and
Total
lush
Wars
with
had
imposing
that, I feel
mountains
like, and
in the
then they've
background.
kind of dropped that.
So the architecture of the battle maps.
Well,
itself,
Troy
the
had some of
buildings
that.
Are also
Troy had some of
reflects the different cultures, and we have even gone into further details. For example, as part of your character development, you can assign different titles to your characters, and these are also specific to different cultures, and some of them are specific to different factions.
Very standard,
So,
very standard
how
stuff.
have you captured the different cultures from those different regions in the game specifically?
Well, on the more narrative side, we have tried to express the character of the cultures through actual characters, which would be the more generic kind of commanders and generals that you play with on the campaign map. And since they are a very predominant part of what you do in the game, we have tried to differentiate them as characters. And all of them have specific quirks. The Egyptians are a bit haughty, for example. The Nubian Egyptians, sort of long after the lost glory of the Kush kingdom, which was subjugated by Egypt at some point during the New Kingdom. The Canaanites are ready for everything because they've seen everything. Their country has been, their land has been a battleground for great empires for centuries. They're used to everything. They're a bit nihilistic, but still they hold out hope that their children might inherit something livable. And the Hittites are sort of divided between the type of Hittite leader that might want to keep their community together and protect their community, and the other one who is just a mercenary at heart and try to simply find profit where he can.
Who are the faces? Who are the rulers we are going to see in the game? Like who are the faces we're going to love and who are we going to hate in Pharaoh?
Well, I certainly hope that one can find things to be endeared about, you know, in terms of every character that they play with. And all of them have their quirks, but all of them also have humanity, I hope. And I hope that we have tried to express that in the game scripts and whatnot. Otherwise, the three cultures are represented by, respectively, the Egyptian culture by 4 characters, the Canaanites are 2, and the Hittites are also 2. And
Interesting. Okay.
all of them have their own reasons and claim to glory and to ruling, while others might.
They didn't show much of the map. I wonder if Egypt is going to be like gigantic compared to the other areas. So if it's divided by 4 versus like 2 and 2, tells me it's a much bigger area, or at least those playable areas are going to be there's less NPCs versus like the other areas there might be more NPCs. Interesting.
Fall more on the side of the spectrum that just wants to prove that they are strong. These 2 representatives that we have of, on one side, the desire to unite and to leave something for the ages that will be everlasting. This is our quote-unquote main character, who is Ramses, later to become Ramses III. How he starts out the game is as almost a child. He's very, very young, but he has been given the rulership over Sinai. He
North side. Okay, so you got Nile over here. Okay, so this is the Sinai Peninsula. Syria would be up there.
He has been given the rulership over Sinai, which is a border region of Egypt that is between Egypt and Canaan. And it's basically his proving grounds. And from there on, he wants to show everyone that he is simply the best person for the job. He is extremely talented, and everything that he's tried so far has worked, including keeping in check the raids of the most fearsome raider in one of our other characters, the most fearsome raider by reputation of that time, Ursu, who is a Canaanite war chief. Historically, we only know the name of that character, so we needed to do some narrative work in order to create a character for him.
Shrouded in mystery.
Yeah, we
Makes sense.
unshroud some of that mystery, and we give him motivation and whatnot. He hates Ramses' guts. While Ramses doesn't see what the big deal is, this is just some raider. While for Ursu, this isn't a game. He's survived for decades, barely. He has 1,000 wounds to speak of how he managed to survive. And for him, the fact that this child is getting in his way of raiding and ravaging and sacking all of Egypt is a real problem.
Indeed, one of the things that I like about Ursu is that he does not really understand the necessity of ruling a land, except for this is a proper source of riches and things you can consume. This is how he works. This is how he understands the world, which is quite different from Ramesses, who has this duty to perform well, like to defend his homeland. And in this,
That just makes me think that like you'll like as Ramses, you'll just have this like malice towards diplomacy with this other ruler. Like he'll just never agree to peace or other agreements. You know, vice versa. Like since Ramses doesn't really care about this guy. Like if you were to play him, the Canaanite, then you could probably get a peace deal or other sort of diplomatic agreements. You know, so like it's just baked in, which kind of sucks. Be cool if there was like some sort of like, you know, historical legacy. I'm more akin, I guess, to Crusader Kings 3, where it's just like, you know, oh, you've wronged me in the past, you know, we have -50 relations, and that like sort of kicks off after a while, like it goes away or it goes down. Or if there's some way to like overcome it, usually like in I've been doing this a lot in Total War Warhammer 3, is like just gift a bunch of money, and you know that kind of helps outweigh any sort of like penalties that they have towards you. Like aversion is usually the way or it's what they call it in the game, where they like hate your guts just naturally, and that never goes away. But you can like ally with them, you know, fight their enemies and like give them money, and then that sort of helps push it back towards like them being open to like a non-aggression pact or trade agreement or something like that. So it'll be interesting to see if it's hard-coded like how Total War Warhammer 3 has it. I'm trying to remember how the other Total War games have it, and I believe it's like a relation. It's baked in version. So my guess is it's going to be baked in kind of malices to diplomacy and stuff like that. But you know, they could always change it.
prove his own worth.
Right.
Because Ramesses, if I remember correctly, he's very much wants to take after Ramesses II, his namesake.
Yes.
The great pharaoh before him, the father of Merneptah. And this is what he's going to try and do in the game.
Yeah.
So thank you, Todor. Thank you, Manuel, for joining us. Oh my goodness, the culture and history of the game. We're just blown away by all of this. But before we wrap up, a very special treat for you all. Here is the opening cinematic for Total War Pharaoh. Enjoy.
That's the actual cinematic, or is it
Thank you all
bridged?
for joining us. We're incredibly excited to share a first look at Total War Pharaoh.
was a
We're
little
only
disappointing.
just beginning to scratch the surface of what's to come.
There's a ton on the way in the next few months. So remember that pre-orders are open, and that by pre-ordering, you'll be ready to play day one when the game releases this October.
And that's us from Sophia and the New Kingdom
All right,
of Egypt.
October sounds good.
Here's one final look at the trailer of Total War Pharaoh. Enjoy.
thought it was just gonna be the trailer again, but this is cool, showing the orchestra. I'm excited about the music in this game. I love game music, so I'm always keen to, you know, figure out if it's good or not. Or if I like it, at least. Gotta say, with the idea that, like, you know, you start off younger and stuff like that, like they've had in the older Total Wars, it's pretty exciting, I have to say. I'm excited for the game overall. Definitely, it's my definitely my vibe.